Unit 3 is called Making a Living, and it's basically about employment and jobs that we do and how that is changing. Key thing, very key thing to remember for this unit is the 4 different types of jobs that we do: primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary. Make sure you know the difference between the 4 of them. Now, the main thing to remember is that the percentage of people who do primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary jobs in a country, that's called the employment structure. So, for instance, here in the UK, about 1% or so of people do primary work, somewhere around 15-16% do secondary work, and somewhere around 80% of us do tertiary work. But that changes. The employment structure of a country changes over time. If you go back 30 years, many more people were doing primary, many more people were doing secondary, less people were doing tertiary. Now, the way that the employment structure changes over time is called the Clark-Fisher model. This is in your exam booklets. It's also on this YouTube channel in the specific lesson. So you can have a proper look at it. But it basically just shows how the employment structure changes as a country develops from a pre-industrial country, very low income, mostly primary jobs, through to an industrial country dominated by secondary jobs, and then post-industrial, high income, mostly tertiary and also quaternary. Make sure you have a look at the Clark-Fisher model. Make sure that you're aware of what it looks like and that you can talk about it. So how does industry change? Industry changes through processes such as deindustrialization. This is what's happened over the last 30 years in Britain, for instance. Industry closes. Factories close. Less people do primary industry, primary jobs. That's called deindustrialization. Causes a lot of problems. People lose their jobs, less tax is paid, more people are on benefits, so it's expensive for the government. An example of a place where this happened was Glasgow. It used to be one of the biggest shipbuilding centres in the world. It closed in the 80s, the whole area declined, steel mills closed, and the whole area just basically didn't come out of it very well. It has improved in recent years, but it's been gone through quite a few years of quite bad times. But when you replace employment after deindustrialization, so some of the old factories that were closed down, they're being turned into things like flats and shops or theatres or cafes or restaurants or whatever. It's happening all over the country in places where industry used to happen. The example we looked at was in Birmingham. And deindustrialization and changing industry has a number of environmental impacts. It leaves buildings empty, it leaves pollution, it leaves land all derelict. And this is what brownfield sites are. Areas of land that used to have things on them that haven't anymore. 2 examples of countries where you've got different types of employment: Germany and Mexico. LEDCs have lots of people in primary and secondary and less in tertiary. MEDCs have lots in tertiary and less in primary and secondary. Germany is an example of an MEDC. Lots of people in tertiary, not many people in primary. It's shifted from manufacturing to finance and business over the last 20 or 30 years. Mexico, on the other hand, is industrializing. It's developing. It's growing. So there's more and more people in the manufacturing industry and secondary industry, 35% or so. It produces a lot of stuff in factories and it sells it out around the world. That's how it's developing. That's how it's getting richer. But it's facing competition from countries like China and countries like India, and it's finding it very hard to compete with them. So Mexico is actually starting to move into tourism, which is an example of tertiary industry. In Southeast Asia, you have countries known as the Asian Tigers: Taiwan, South Korea, Thailand, Hong Kong and Singapore. Their economies developed very, very, very quickly over the last 15, 20 years. More trade with other countries, but to do that, to grow quickly in your economy, you need social rights, you need strong politicians, you need a decent, stable government. And urbanisation is directly linked to the development of jobs, because as you change from primary industry moving to secondary, people want to move to the cities. That's where the factories are, that's where the work is. So people move from rural areas to urban areas. Urbanisation. But it does have a number of downsides. When people get to urban areas, they don't find the jobs that they were hoping to find. They end up joining the informal economy. Things like cleaning shoes, cleaning windows, cash in hand money that doesn't pay tax, that the government's not aware of. Remember though, the informal economy doesn't just exist in LEDCs, it exists here in MEDCs as well. For instance, a lot of plumbers, a lot of tradesmen nowadays will do cash in hand work. Why? Because they don't need to pay tax. Okay, so the informal economy exists not only in LEDCs but in MEDCs as well.